Hello and welcome to Digital Photography's I3 lecture series. We are thrilled to have Dan Burkholder as tonight's guest speaker. Dan received his BA and MFA degrees in photography from the Brooks Institute. Originating the digital negative process in 1992, Dan helped open doors for black and white photographers interested in moving into the new electronic technologies. His award-winning book, Making Digital Negatives for Contact Printing, is regarded as the most authoritative work in the field. More recently, he has published The Color of Loss, An Intimate Portrait of New Orleans After Katrina, 2008, and iPhone Artistry, 2011. His works are in the permanent collections of the Houston Museum of Art, the Whitney Museum, San Antonio Museum of Art, and the Phoenix Museum of Art. Dan has taught classes and workshops at the School of Art Institute of Chicago, the International Center of Photography, the University of Texas at San Antonio, and the Museum of Photographic Arts in San Diego. Dan, I admire how you're always on the side of innovation, but never lose sight of the traditions that have brought us to the present moment. And just from talking to you earlier, I know it's going to be a really fun lecture and very, very full of insight. So thank you and welcome to our lecture series.
Thank you, Jaime. Well, thanks, Jaime, for the warm introduction, most of which is even accurate. And thank you all for coming. And I may wander away from this mic. If I do, does my voice still carry? Because I sort of move around, but I'll try to stay anchored in this one position. Believe it or not, we're going to sort of talk in a roundabout way about the whole arc of photography. You know, it's been around for, 188 years now, from the oldest surviving photograph, which is from 1826. So that's really a pretty young medium, isn't it? It's not that much history that we even have. You wonder, if you're going to get a PhD in the history of something, do it in photography, because you don't have to learn as much. There aren't as many books you have to digest. But like I said, a roundabout way, we're going to kind of, allude to that, but kind of in a self-serving way with my own imagery and some of the delightful stories I'll tell too. And one of the things I always tell people that if you don't like change, you pick the wrong medium. Since the inception, since that first Niepce image, this curve of change has been constant. It's been going up and up. And what really shook up people when we hit like about 20 years ago, in fact, this is the 25th anniversary of Photoshop. When we hit that, the pace of change, of course, just went vertical. And that threatened a lot of people. It energized a lot of people. And I kind of think photography is sort of like, oh, my sister just sent a message, and it doesn't show up there. That's nice. So, just order bulk case of Viagra. Oh, that's an important message. So we were afraid that the message would pop up here, but they don't.
He's presenting from his iPhone in case you didn't.
Oh yeah, the whole thing is this is the presentation right here. So yeah, thanks for my. Yeah, I mean, it's so cool. You don't come in with, what are these old-fashioned things called? Lippy tops or something? Lappy tops? We used to be used back in the Paleolithic era. But no, I just think it's thrilling, unless it screws up, then I won't think it's so thrilling, that we can walk in with your phone and do a whole presentation from it. And by the way, this is from Keynote, which is sort of like a PowerPoint done right, without all the bloat and all the other stuff. But let's talk about what you should, if you don't like change, maybe consider pottery instead. Because in pottery, your big change was moving from the foot-driven potter's wheel to the electrically driven potter's wheel. That was your big innovation. And that's all you had to adapt to. In photography, it's all about change. And it's sort of like a ride at the fair. You can be very timid. You can stay outside the carnival and you can watch the rides, the tilt-a-whirl. You can not even get close. Or you can be a little braver and you can go into the carnival, stand next to it and watch the other people having fun. Or you can get on the ride, throw your hands up in the air, scream, and really enjoy it. And photography is the same way. So I think it's the best course is to do that last one. Jump on the ride, scream, be a little bit intimidated, be a little bit scared, turn your wallet upside down, shake all your money out, but enjoy it. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about some stuff here. Photographic memories is what I like to call this little section. I've been showing this for years because I think it's so apropos. And it's about our design aptitudes. And what I've done here is juxtaposed, and it's a serious art talk if we use a word like juxtapose. So I've juxtaposed historic images of mine from the first grade, and that was a pre-photographic era, personally speaking. I was working in crayon at the time. So we're gonna go from 1955 and 6 to a contemporary image, and we're going to talk about the similarities here. So that's one of the early pieces. And believe it or not, I still have that problem running out of space when I sign my name. I don't allow enough space. Once years ago, I won this billboard contest where they turned an image into a 40-foot wide billboard, and they asked me to sign it, and I did the same thing. I signed it and ran out of space for my last name. So nothing really changed. But that's 1955 or 56 with the bird in the tree. And then we go to a contemporary platinum palladium image, which is digital, of the speckled vulture in pine forest. You see some similarities there? Let's go back to 1955. So there, the building in the center. I wish I could tell you that was a camera on that tripod, but I think it was some kind of ray gun or something that I put the gun. And then we'll go to a contemporary image of the Flatiron in spring. So let's do another one here. Notice the bold use of symmetry with the building in the center and the trees on the side, 1956. And then School and Trees, Scotland, which is a Photoshop image. Everything was there except for that little one-room schoolhouse. This is 20 years old, this image. And that little one-room schoolhouse is where Lyndon Johnson went to school in Texas. So I, of course, dropped that into Photoshop back before we even had layers. And then the shape of the, like the road or the shadow, whatever you'd like to regard it, was of course done in Photoshop, as was the vignette on the sky. And the last one I'm going to show you here, this was from 1956. The teacher thought this was so advanced, it was beyond postmodern. She called it post-futurist. So that's 1956, and then here is a contemporary image. So the point that is obviously what I'm trying to make is this aesthetic ROM chip of ours is burned very early on. You know, whether it's because of the kind of wallpaper we have around our cribs or the kind of curtains we have blowing or the texture of our father's beards, the shape of our mother's breasts, whatever it is, those kind of inputs burn into the sense of design that we have. So if you find yourself drawn to those same things, those same compositions, those same textures, those same lighting patterns over and over, that's okay, honor that. But just make sure it's coming from in here and not because you saw a Judy Dater or a Michael Kenna or an Ansel Adams show or something the weekend before over at the Met. Make sure it's coming from in your heart. Now this next little section, this deals with the transition from classic to digital. For instance, this image is not digital. And Jaime, we worked on the projector. He did a great job of making some adjustments. You are losing a little bit of detail in the shadows, and some of the colors are a little off, but it's really, he helped me out a lot getting it much closer. So it ain't perfect, but it's really good. So nothing digital about that. That was done in the wet darkroom. And years ago, I wrote my master's thesis on masking. This was before we had Photoshop. I alluded to the coming digital revolution, but this was done on easel with multiple negatives, of course, a la like Jerry Ullsman, putting multiple images together. This image, there's nothing digital at all about this. This is, in fact, this is one of my favorite images. And this was shot on film, Tri-X. How many of you remember Tri-X? Or maybe you're still using Tri-X, a great film, but processed in paper developer to pop a grain. Now we're going back to 1983, so that's a good number of years ago. So that was the way we did that then. Now you'd shoot it digitally, you'd put the grain in, soft focus lens, you could do that either on camera or later. You could synthesize that in Photoshop or elsewhere. But back then we had those kind of controls. There was bleaching done like on the strap to raise those tonal values on the face. Here's another one from that same series where with potassium ferrocyanide, you know, I painted along the bleach to lighten that strap to guide the viewer's eye. And one of the things that I always like to point out to students, you know, those of us working in the visual arts where we're working 2D, two-dimensional, our job is to take that wacky world of three-dimensional reality out there and we're putting it on a flat piece of paper, generally in a rectangle, right? That's a really powerful departure from reality in the first place. So our job is to guide the viewer's eye, to orchestrate eye movements around that frame. And I think that's, if you're a black and white photographer, a monochromatic photographer, tonality is all you have. If you incorporate color, of course, you got one more visual clue to help the viewer on their journey. There's nothing digital about this image. This was in India. This pilgrim was bathing her sari in the morning. And think about this. If I hadn't used flash fill, those boats in the background were receiving the same illumination as this pilgrim. So she would have been silhouetted had I not used flash fill to pop in. And this was with film way back. And then I did do some bleaching in the darkroom just to make the translucency, the feeling of the light coming through the wet fabric a little stronger. Nothing digital on this one either. This is Dog Going to Church, Paris. And this is Notre Dame in the background. And I'd set the tripod up because it was such a beautiful design, and found out years later that Auger photographed the same corner, so he had good taste, obviously. So set up the camera on a tripod and photographed this, and then noticed this dog kind of coming down the road, so cocked the shutter again, and as the dog entered the frame, made another exposure. And you can imagine the one without the dog. I never bothered printing that when I got back to the States and back to the darkroom. But here's something I want to point out. See this leg? Dogs' legs don't bend that way. That's a camera time distortion. And it's wonderful when the medium shows its own hand, when it presents things that don't happen, that don't exist. You know, it's called photography, it's not called reality. And that's part of the charm of the medium that we embrace. There's nothing digital about this. This was in the wet darkroom, but it is a composite. The sky was from Texas and the foreground is from India. Seems like a natural juxtaposition to me. But this was done in the wet darkroom, double printing. Now, of course, we wouldn't do it that way anymore. You know, what I like so much about this image is I'm not sure whether I got this kind of Gaussian glow effect in the wet darkroom or in Photoshop. I don't remember. And you know, I used to do a lot of under lens diffusion, you know, we'd do everything from silk stocking on a piece of cardboard to crinkled cellophane. You know, I even had a Spirotone mist maker filter that I used to put under my enlarging lens. And when we diffuse under the enlarging lens, it's a very different effect, isn't it? Think about it. Photography means writing with light, right? When we diffuse on camera, we work with light, we spread light so the highlights glow, right? When we diffuse under the enlarging lens, the light coming through makes our dark values so the darks bleed out and expand. We cannot get that effect on camera. So this is post-processing back then in the optical chemical era of photography. So these people that say, oh, you shouldn't do any, you know, if you do post, if you alter the image, that's not true photography. A lot of us have been about post-processing way before there was Photoshop or way before, you know, computers got involved with the equation on our images. And then back in started doing the research in 92, but 95 was when the book actually came out, the first edition of making digital negatives for contact printing. And that really opened the door for me and for legions of others that we could combine the precision and the control of digital with the warmth of the handmade print. You know, back then, 20 years ago, inkjet printers were not very good. They weren't archival, the quality wasn't very good. So the darkroom, the wet darkroom was where we still went, and the wet darkroom is still a very wonderful, energetic place as far as I'm concerned. This image, and I love showing this one because the title is Man Lifting Catfish with Penis. And he was standing on dry ground in Nepal. The monsoons had started early, and he popped out behind the temple and said, want to see me lift heavy rock with male organ? And I said, well, sure. So photographed him, and then the rest, this Rorschach kind of symmetry, though there are little lichens that break up the symmetry, believe it or not. You know, that's kind of so easy to do, I'd be embarrassed to do it anymore, but this again was 20 years ago. So, but notice, here's the one thing that should be pointed out. Notice how his tendons are standing out on his neck. The same thing happens when I try that. You know, my tongue also comes out of the corner of my mouth. Student with uncertain future. There was like a whole growing uncertain future series I was working on. And you know, I haven't sent this print out in years. It was shot through the windshield of the car, and that cheesy effect on the bus I would never do now. And there was a second student walking out that was retouched out. But I really like the ominous feeling of that solo student walking out in the morning fog there in Texas to get on the bus. Now, this is Pigs in Frozen Paradise. And this is digital, believe it or not. And you know, Jill, my wife, is in the audience. She says that I have a talent for making images, making prints that no one wants to buy. But believe it or not, you want to get a still of this one, right? That'll be what I'm remembered for. So this is a composite. There are actually 3 different pieces. Actually, these little Adobe ruin sections were from one image. The church, and this is not meant to be anti-religious. We wouldn't do that. The church is from a second frame of film. And then the pigs, which were down in Tehuantepec, Mexico, were from a third. And getting back and looking at proof sheets, it just seemed like they had to be united somehow and put together. Batch through grass, this is a composite, but not done in Photoshop. This is like a Ullsman-esque, multiple enlargers, double printing. The bats were all in one frame. They're not, believe it or not, there's a bat cave north of San Antonio, Texas, which is in the Guinness Book of World Records as having the largest concentration of mammals anywhere on Earth. And I was able to contact the landowner, and he took me out there, and the bats come out and go into this vortex. So right at dusk, they come out of the cave and they're flying around. And what I realized is that I was there with my Nikon with T-Max 3200 in it, that this is their morning. You know, they're waking up and coming out to go feed right at dusk, and they're all going to the bathroom. The first thing they do, not an uncommon behavior for mammals, right, when you wake up. And I was in their latrine, right outside their cave, as they're in like this, like the base of a washing machine where 1 million bats are going around in a circle. This is Photoshop. This was used on the cover of one of the books. And this is 3 images put together, the turtle in church, Alice, Texas. But it wasn't a question of going out thinking about designing this image. It was 3 days of shooting with one of those images on each of those days, completely disjointed in 3 different locations in South Texas, and then getting back and looking at them and deciding they needed to be together. The shadow, and I apologize for the slightly, the cast and the shadows are kind of not so velvety. But the shadow was created in Photoshop from the shape of the turtle because of the way shadows work. The turtle was photographed in the aquarium down in Corpus Christi, if anyone's interested. And then about, gosh, almost 8 years ago, trying to think of where can the platinum print. I'd been a platinum printer for years, and I thought, well, what else could happen to the platinum print? So I thought, well, I'll add another precious metal. So this, and I'm still doing this, even with iPhone images, and we'll get to some of those. I print the platinum print on a very thin 100% cotton vellum. And after the platinum print is processed, cleared, washed, and dried, then with an archival adhesive, which I found in the gilding world is called a size, I put 24 karat gold on the back and then varnish the vellum so it becomes very translucent. So the light goes through the vellum, hits the gold, and comes out. And you get something that obviously a projected image can't replicate, but it has a very special kind of quality to it. Color, I like to give credit to a Spanish photographer friend, Jose Maria Miato, who's just a wonderful photographer. And as he put it, for about the first 175 years of photography, the monochromatic image, the silver print, the platinum print, the Van Dyke, that was the domain of the serious creative photographer. And as he explains it, the reasons are twofold. One, it's the only place where we had archival materials. The color image, even like a Cibachrome, was fugitive, and other color materials were very fugitive. But secondly, it's the only place where we had control. For how many of you ever worked in a color printing darkroom under like a Chromega color head? It's not a very fun place for most of us, is it? You're in total darkness. It's very hard to do any burning and dodging without getting crossover color weirdnesses and stuff like that. Only a few really incredibly devoted masters can claim to have control of that medium. Black and white, we could alter the process into the film, we could change the development of the print, etc. But when Photoshop and archival pigments hit the scene, that addressed both of those problems. We had control and we had archival materials. So for a lot of photographers for whom previously the monochromatic image had been their only area of interest, suddenly color was interesting. Now the way I tiptoed into it, this is pigment over platinum. I would take a watercolor paper and run through the Epson, and that would put a light wash of color down on there, no good contrast or anything, and then hand coat the platinum sensitizer over top of that, make a digital negative from that same file in Photoshop and just print it on the Epson, dry, of course, the coating, register it in the darkroom in a vacuum frame, and then expose it to ultraviolets. So all the blacks and all the contrast would come from the platinum, but the subtle color would come from the Epson. So that was the way I tiptoed into color, not wanting to abandon the handmade component. So these borders in these images are not like a extensive filter set. Those are real hand-coated platinum. That's from Prague. Here's an image. This was printed in pigment over platinum. This is the way the final image looked, but you're going to see how this started. You notice any difference at all? That's the way it started, and then it turned to that. Now that car was there, but just in another frame, and it was not about the grass and stuff on the moor there in Scotland. It was about the S-curve of the road and about the atmospheric perspective with the valley in the background. And then another era came where I discovered this Fisher-Price Fun Photo Maker camera. Have any of you ever used that? You have one now? And you can roll your own. You know, it's fax paper. You have to cut down the wider rolls. And it's a little camera. It's shaped kind of like a Polaroid 600. And it has sort of like a Canon palm printer head. You take the picture and it plays a tune, and this print head goes back. It's a thermal printer on fax paper. So you get images like this. This is a cat under desk lamp. And you know, it's the kind of image where midtones are an endangered species. You know, it's like a chalk and soot output. But it's quite beautiful. And unlike, you know, at that era in photography, we're going back like maybe 15 years ago, when we were trying to hide any evidence, any flaws in our digital work. We were so enamored with the pixel perfect image. This was sort of like the answer to that, where you embrace the artifacts. And we're going to come full circuit, of course, that with our iPhone imagery. But there's the T-Rex gigging the Taurus there. Now this, you're going to think this is very strange, but this is Black Cat at my feet. And this, for me, is like the perfect photograph. If I never make any photograph better, I think this is all you need in a photograph to be perfect. And then, in 2005, the end of 2005, Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans, and we had this episode where both Mother Nature and government conspired against the people of New Orleans to just wreak havoc on their lives. So Jill, my wife, and I talked about the need to get down there and photograph, or to see what happened to New Orleans, even if we didn't photograph. So we ended up making 3 trips down, and this was, HDR had just hit the scene. I thought, well, if there's any time to use HDR, this has to be it in 2006. So we're going back 8 years, well, 9 years now. And that image is a little more contrasty. So I'll show you some images from that body of work. So we had seen, at that time, we'd seen all the pictures of the piles of debris on the outside, the homes that were washed off their foundations. But there was a more intimate story taking place inside, in the homes, the businesses, the churches. So that's where the camera went. These exposures, because they were very dark, in this church, the only light was coming through these little narrow slit windows, otherwise it was very dark. So these are anywhere from 6 to 16 bracketed exposures that are put together, sometimes in excess of 15-minute long exposures to get shadow detail, and then melded together later with software. And you'll notice like the fan blades here, those are hanging down because the water line was there on the ceiling. This was in the lower 9th ward, so those fan blades were underwater for like 2 weeks, and it softened and drooped over. And that's the last, though not that contrasted, last one of the images from the high school auditorium in the lower 9th ward. And this is one of the saddest images because, you know, we didn't, Jill and I, if there was any sign of people returning or no trespassing signs, we would honor that. But usually all these homes, the doors have been kicked open looking for survivors or remains, and there was no one that cared about whether you went in or not, and we didn't disturb anything. But obviously an older person lived in this house, and she had piled up some stuff on the bed, I guess trying to save it, and her house dress was hanging there. And that was a 16-minute exposure to get shadow detail on that one. And then that image of the hymnal on the pew is the last image in the book. And in the original, these prints are done 12 by 18 and 20 by 30. You can see words like mercy and Lord in the hymn. I'm not sure what hymn it is. And then that was the cover of that book. And then, of course, you want something that's a little less emotionally taxing after you do a project like that. So high dynamic range in the field, taken out, this is the Hudson River Valley where Jill and I moved 8 years ago this month. So I'll just show you quickly some of those images. This is a straight shot from down in Florida, where I'll actually be going next week to teach. So I'm there alone in the hotel room at night. It's actually 10:37. So of course, you know, you're going to do photography. So I set the camera up, and that's the straight shot. And then there's the high dynamic range shot. And there's nothing special about that, except it might be a little more visually appealing. But I want to zoom in on the clock and show you what happens. The time rendered on the clock is 10:98 p.m. And in a nutshell, what high dynamic range does, and by shooting this series of different exposures and melding that tonality together, it sort of takes the best midtones from each picture, right? So it created, as these LED segments went on and off, it created a time that doesn't exist. Sort of like the dog going to church, where it was a camera time distortion. So this is just wonderful even when it's created digitally. It's just so exciting when photography does that. There are actually at least 4 other photographers in this room out of 11. We photographed this Socrates parade, 3 years ago this year, isn't it? Yeah, it'll be 3 years ago in July. And everyone took a different tack. It was just a wonderful, I mean, these people all became friends, and well, except for a couple of exceptions here. But I was kind of, and everyone, some people even did monochromatic work, did long lens stuff. It was just wonderful to see how everyone had a different approach. So I'll just show you a few from my series. I was going for kind of a Norman Rockwell sort of feel. So, and I love shooting with the little Olympus I have because the screen tilts down so I could hold the camera up, and tap to focus and shoot overhead and stuff like that. So that's like my favorite image. Here's one, just kind of the things you'd see in that parade. The boy with the dog. So going for that sort of Norman Rockwell kind of thing happening there. Now, of course, iPhone photography is where a lot of us are excited right now. I did do that book in 2012, turned the manuscript in early 2011, and it took them over a year to bring it to press, which was really disappointing. I said, in the Photoshop world, we have like an 18-month window before there's like another version of Photoshop. In the iPhoneography world, we got like 6 months max before everything's changed. So the publisher was nice to work with, but not very good on the time front. But I'm going to show you, we're going to talk a little bit about iPhone photography here. And this, I only include this home screen shot because this is from about 2008. The first iPhone came out in 2007. And then, like I didn't jump in on Photoshop 1, I jumped in Photoshop 2. Didn't get the iPhone until the second iPhone, which was the 3G. But what's so fun about this is a lot of these apps like Art Camera, Filter FX, are things that I don't think even exist anymore because there's so much change in the world of iPhoneography. These apps have gone by the wayside. A few of them are still around. For instance, AutoStitch is still one of our wonderful iPhone apps. In fact, you'll see some images done where I've stitched as many as 100 separate images together on the iPhone, where you're doing shoot, kind of shooting in a square-esque pattern and melding all those images together to get vistas that you just can't get any other way with fisheye or anything else. So, of course, just to recap this history, the first camera phone, which was actually a Palm Trio, I'd do things like this, take a picture of the airport, where I parked. And that's still a good thing to do. So you have a record of where you parked your car, so when you get back a couple weeks later, you know where it is. And then, of course, we start taking pictures of our pets, which I did. And there's even a picture of Smudgy Bear. He has his own astronaut outfit. This is an app called Fantasy Lens that lets you do this kind of thing. In fact, here's a self-portrait done with Fantasy Lens. And it's just, it's sinfully fun. And it takes, it's like 99 cents. And I tell people, if you get 15 minutes of pleasure out of it's cheaper than going to a movie, isn't it? And you don't have to keep these apps forever. You can throw it away. Now, if I wanted to thoroughly embarrass myself and show you like in settings, general, about, I have like 670 apps on here. It's sinful, and there's no virtue to that whatsoever. And then I started doing things like, this is just our backyard in late fall, stitching images together to get things like this, and started playing with textures. And sort of like that Fisher-Price Fun Photo Maker introduced this whole thing. Well, now we're able to we're in this era of textures and artifacts and stuff where we're embracing that, especially with mobile photography. So this is one in the Catskills. This is done like about 5 or 6 years ago. And this is the final image, but this is the set from which this came. Now this screenshot was done in Lightroom, but only so you would see the entire rectangular image, because if I took a screenshot of the camera roll, it truncates it down to little squares and you wouldn't see the whole thing. So these, if you count these, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 16, 19 images were stitched together with software that costs like, what, $1.99 or something, auto stitch, and then all the textural component, all the contrast and everything was done on the iPhone. No Photoshop, no Lightroom. This image was stitched from about 30-some different images on the iPhone to get this. It's handheld. I do have an example in here. In fact, this one. This was used on a magazine cover in Australia, and this was stitched from 84 separate images. And the camera was very low in this. This is in Pennsylvania at a place called Fonthill, where this old industrialist who made ceramic tiles, this was in his home, and it's now been turned into kind of a museum you can tour. So the camera was very low, and I did use a tripod because it was just going to be kind of awkward because the camera was almost aimed down and the iPhone was almost aimed up at the ceiling. So it's kind of like shoot, 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 and then pivoting to the right. So kind of going in the square S pattern for those exposures and then stitching them together on the iPhone. There's Bryant Park, some of you recognize that, right after finishing a class at ICP. And then walking back towards Grand Central, right down 43rd as you go down there, just handheld with the iPhone and the Chrysler Building in the background. Another example of where the photography shows its own hand. The iPhone, some of you, how many of you have iPhones? In New York, that's like 80% of the class, right, of the group. How many of you played with the sweep pano mode? Where you hit the shutter and it's great, it's amazing. And it even works if you put a fisheye lens in and pan, it will still put it together. How does it do that? I mean, the computational stuff is stunning. And I've been doing this for years and I still get a chill when I think about what's happening. But this boat, this was in Florence, and this boat was coming down the river there. So I did the sweep pano with the iPhone as the boat traveled. So it stretched the boat out. And a normal crew boat would be what, 8 people maybe? I don't know how many are on a crew boat, but probably about 8. So it turns into like a 50 boat or 50-person crew boat. And that's not reality, but it's photography. And that I get really excited by that kind of thing. I just threw this in for fun. Because it has nothing to do with photography whatsoever. But it's just too good to resist. Now a few years ago, Jill and I were here in the city, and we were leaving, going across the George Washington Bridge, and it was raining. I love telling this story. And I was driving, Jill was in the passenger seat. I said, Jill, would you hold the steering wheel so I can make a picture here? She said, I'm not going to hold the steering wheel going across the George Washington Bridge in the rain. So I said, well, someone should, because I'm doing photography. So, and she was a good sport. And we've all done that thing where we try to hit the shutter at the right time so we don't get the windshield wiper blade in the picture. And you can see dots of rain on the windshield. So that's the raw capture. And I didn't process it while driving. I did process it later when we switched drivers. So here's the final image. And Steichen's one of my heroes, with that aquamarine kind of color, like his gum over platinum. So I was trying to emulate that. And I'm going to go back for a second because I want you to know something. This is a 3:4 aspect ratio, isn't it? That's our native aspect ratio. Kind of like our point and shoots are 3:4. Our iPhones, a lot of our Android devices are 3:4. And notice this headlights at the edge, and there's that space there with the cables. Now, I did fix the keystoning with an app called Front View, to get rid of that tilt the camera up effect. That's not distortion, that's perspective. But on the final image, it's square, but actually, I did crop a little bit. In this version, we're losing a little bit of that, and I apologize. But what I did was, instead of cropping this, squeeze it down from 3:4 to 3:3, and things get kind of Tolkien-esque. They get a little more fanciful when you do that. It's kind of a fun thing. That's our backyard. That was stitched from probably about 25 images or so. Now this is just a little video that we're going to throw in here. It's about 15 seconds long. And this is down in Florida where I'll be teaching next week, and it's kind of fun. Well, we're back from our field trip, and there's Molly and George. They're working on all their wonderful iPhone images. Now, of course, that was Action Movie FX, which is free, and then you can buy extra add-on kind of effects. It's become kind of cliche, but it is just so fun to do. Jaime mentioned kindly putting the old together with the new. And photography just keeps getting bigger and bigger, doesn't it? And it's not that one part is better than another. You can't do it all. You got to sort of stake out where your heart lies in the medium. But it is fun. We can kind of mix and match. And I like to kind of think about how many of you have seen the movie The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly? It's a classic, right? Spaghetti Western with Lee Van Cleef, Clint Eastwood, and Eli Wallach, who we just lost last year. 97? Great actor. Well, there's that tremendous scene in there where Eli Wallach has been robbed of everything and says long johns only, and he needs a gun, so he goes into this gunsmith, and he has the gunsmith get out like a Colt and a Smith & Wesson, and Eli Wallach proceeds to take like the barrel of the Colt with the bullet cylinder of the Smith & Wesson. He kind of knows the best features of each weapon. He knows how to build his ideal weapon. And in photography, we're all drawn to this medium because it satisfies certain aesthetic goals and certain aptitudes and stuff. But we can mix and match and pick the parts that give us the most fun. So in this case, I love shooting with the iPhone. This was shot down in Mexico in a little convenience store of a Mexican cowboy. But I make a digital negative then from that iPhone image and print that on hand-coated platinum with a 24-karat gold leaf. So pulling from the old and the new and putting those together. And it's just really fun. And, you know, you don't get points for doing anything the hard way. But this is some way, sometimes the print medium can let your work be separated from the crowd. You know, now that photography is so easy, everyone's creating millions of images every day. So you can differentiate yourself a little bit. There's another one of the typewriter and lamp that's shot with the iPhone and then printed with platinum over gold leaf. This is one of the first ones where this is the Newburgh Beacon Bridge, by the way, shot from the airplane window with the Hudson. And you'll notice that there's gold leaf around most of the image, but on the water area, it was one of the first where, actually this was the first where I ground together gold leaf with palladium leaf to get a cooler tone, because gold is very aggressively yellow. And you know what? I found that water and snow, if it's pure gold, looks like pea. It's just not very pretty. But by taming the warmth down with the palladium leaf and then hand applying the size and with that ground together gold and palladium like a powder, applying that just in those water areas and then blending in with the pure gold, you can get a split tone kind of effect. And it's really fun, and it's so incredibly sensuous, the materials to work with. I mean, they just feel wonderful to work with. And I'm doing the first class where we actually work with, instead of doing the platinum, because let's face it, a lot of people just can't access a wet darkroom anymore. You know, it's just a pain, and they can't afford it, they can't give the space up to it. So we're going to do inkjet printing on vellum, a special 100% cotton paper that has an ink receptive coating. We're going to do the inkjet printing, but then put the gold and palladium and gesso. I even use gesso to keep highlights white sometimes on the back. So that's going to be a fun, more approachable way for people that can't do the platinum part. You know where that is, up at the 125th Street station. Right, that's an iPhone shot. Just a year, was that 2.5 years ago? No, a year and a half ago. 2.5 years ago, the first time I taught iPhone in Venice. This was the first iPhone app called, at that time, it was called HDR3. All the other HDR apps for the iPhone at that time would just take 2 exposures, light and dark, and meld together, and you get some kind of halo effects. It wasn't too pretty often. So this was one of the first ones that took 3 exposures. Now, hot tip, how many of you use Vivid HDR? Vivid, you got to get that. It's a life changer, Vivid HDR. And it's probably like $1.99. You know, I had to save up like 4 days or so for it. But it's better than this was back then, but this is what we had. So it took 1 exposure for the bright sky area, the sun really was there, 1 for the midtones, and then 1 for dark values. And it melds that tonality together and just does wonderful things. On an airplane ride, I was in the aisle seat, there was a center seat, and this fellow was in the window seat. And he just had such classic features, but doesn't he look like a combination of Mad Men and a Jehovah's Witness? And I kind of sensed that I wouldn't like him in real life, but he sure looked good in a photo. And I just kind of held the iPhone down on my lap and turned the sound off so he didn't hear the shutter. So that was with HDR3, and then of course it was stylized some, but it just turned out kind of nice. Now this, you know, mixing and matching, this is not an iPhone image, but it was processed on the iPhone. And this is from 2001, 6 years before the iPhone existed. And I was in Prague, Jill and I were there, and was writing an article on the little Nikon Coolpix 5000, which was the first 5-megapixel camera. How many of you remember that guy? It had the articulated screen. It was really quite a breakthrough little camera, and it had auxiliary lenses you could put on it. This was with kind of an ultra wide. And I tried, when we got back from the trip, I tried in Photoshop, you know, and stuff to really bring this image out, and was never really completely happy with it. And then about 2 years ago, Wi-Fi'd it over to the iPhone, and because we have this amazing plethora of all these apps for texture, for tonality, for, you know, all kinds of artifact effects, could finally bring that image to fruition and get the feel out of it that I wanted in the first place from an image that was taken like 13 years before. You know, I mentioned HDR3 and now Vivid HDR, and trust me, if you've got an iPhone, get Vivid HDR. It will change your photographic life. It is really stunning. This was shot with Vivid HDR in Tuscany, and we saw, you know, Jill and I were just driving along and saw these sheep. So I ran out and kind of held the camera up, and back then, Vivid was very slow. Now when you hit, it takes 3 exposures almost instantaneously. But back then, a year and a half ago, it was kind of like you'd hear the shutter go 3 times, click, click, click. And these sheep are like scooting by. You know, the shepherd was kind of, you know, chasing them up this hill with his dog and everything. And I thought for sure there was going to be triple image in the sheep. But when I looked at the image, the sheep were perfectly sharp, and this is now hanging in our house like a 20 by 30 inch print from the iPhone. And the way the app segregated the tones, one exposure was for the dark values, one was for the midtones, which included the sheep, and then one was for the bright sky. So it really didn't have 3 pictures of the sheep, the way the app put those together. Remember we said it kind of selects the best midtones from each picture? So there was 0 blur, 0 double or triple image in the sheep, and it's stunning when that happens. And now it's even better. Just a cliche kind of shot from Tuscany. Vivid HDR, and of course stylized and everything there in Florence. We were real fortunate back in May of last year to take this trip. It was actually a gift around the British Isles. And it was one of those Lindblad National Geographic trips. Have you ever done one of those? Now I know why people want to be rich. Never knew why before, but now I get the plot. A little late in the game, but it was amazing. And they had a National Geographic photographer on board in addition to an archaeologist, anthropologist, musicologist, ornithologist. Just stunning experience. And Jim Richardson was the National Geographic photographer. And during the whole trip, the 2 weeks, you know, the only camera we saw him use was his iPhone. Now we're talking a seriously good photographer. In the August issue of National Geographic, he had 24 pages, including the cover. So I mean, we're talking good. But yet he was so excited about the iPhone, he said he was seeing more creative photography coming from the iPhone than from all the other cameras. So I think that's really an eye-opener. So this is iPhone only, a little more contrast than it really is there in St. Kilda. Now, we talk about mixing and matching. This was shot with this little camera here, but you know, all the cameras now have Wi-Fi built in. So this was the image I Wi-Fi'd it to the iPad and then edited it. Now this is, you know where this is? This is right where the high line starts, there next to the Javits. And as you're kind of going on there, if you look, but now this little camera has the equivalent of a 25 millimeter to 600 millimeter optical zoom. And this is the only compact that has the 5-axis stabilization, so you can actually shoot at 600 millimeters and not just get a blur fest from camera shake. So it's really, I just think Olympus is listening to photographers better than all the other camera manufacturers. So this was shot with that at 600 millimeters and then Wi-Fi'd over and stylized right on the iPhone. From the Albany, taken off from the Albany airport, there's the final image, and take a look how it started shot with the iPhone through the airplane camera window. There's the original shot as he took off up there of the top of the Hudson, and it got turned into that. You know, love teaching at the International Center of Photography. In fact, Jill and I will both be down there in in like the middle of March to teach. So this was there at Bryant Park. HDR3, this is right at the corner of 5th and 42nd. You're standing there, Bryant Park would be right, the library would be right behind and to the right of the camera position. And with Vivid HDR, just standing there in the crosswalk, and that car was moving like at 25 miles per hour across the intersection with Vivid HDR, and there's no blur in the shot. I mean, it's just amazing. Now, do you guys like talking tech at all? Yeah, I mean, a lot of us are drawn to this because it's the perfect hybrid of the technical and the artistic, isn't it? Man, if you don't like both, you're going to be frustrated constantly in photography. You don't like both of those things. So this was shot with a larger Olympus, a micro four thirds, with the equivalent of a 600 millimeter lens, you know, a faster lens than this will be at 600, a little better image quality, but then Wi-Fi'd over to the iPhone. And this was another one where that's square now, but it was 3x4 and squeezed it down with an app called iResize to get that more kind of fanciful sort of feel. And the texture and everything was put. I actually print this as a palladium. I put palladium leaf behind it, and behind the white buildings on the back of the vellum I put gesso, white gesso to keep them white, and put palladium leaf everywhere else, and it turns into quite a lovely little print. And this, you know, some of you are probably thinking this. you know, remember what we said, we're all drawn to photography because it satisfies certain things. But, you know, you might say, I'm never going to do this iPhone crap. You know, that's not serious photography. That's okay. If this doesn't come natural to you, you're like the little, what was he called? The Tin Man in Wizard of Oz. So it's okay for you to feel that way about what I've talked about thus far. You know, I always like to show this stuff here at the end. I've been showing this for years. And this is my real first grade report card from 1956. And it has not been photoshopped. So they used wonderful graphics on their front back then. And you can see Miss Som, you know, she signed it. She was really a good teacher. And the principal, I don't think he could sign his name, so he had a rubber stamp there that he put on there. And this is the inside of the actual report card. And you can see we have work and study, got a G in that. Does a reasonable amount of work and puts forth sincere effort. There we go. But down here, see, listens and follows directions. We had some problems there. And then, yeah, kind of foreboding, wasn't it? And then on music, you know, enjoy singing with the group. That's a trait that follows me to this day. And then, of course, this is what you might be interested in. What did this fool get for art? And like I said, this has not been photoshopped. This was my real grade in the first grade in art. Now, in fairness, they were not on an A, B, C, D, F grading scale. They were on an E, G, F, U grading scale. Now, I don't like to say FU, but it was excellent, good, fair, unsatisfactory. So this F was really like a D minus, or, you know, it wasn't really like failing, so it's not as bad as it looks. And then this little section, words to live by. This is the fortune cookie that Jill actually, I got, had her hold it, and we took a picture of it back like 10 years ago in a Chinese restaurant. And this is a challenge cookie. You are capable, competent, and creative. Prove it. So, you know, don't you feel that most of today's the fortune cookies are a ripoff, are they not? They're not fortunes anymore. They're kind of observation cookies, and they're really disappointing. So this is a challenge cookie. This is your challenge to prove it. And then we finish up here with a self-portrait done also with Fantasy Lens, that 99-cent app. And then that's all. So I'm happy. Thank you very much. Hey, I want to show you one more thing. Thanks to some friends that are in the room here right now, we set up the project that I'm doing right now I'm doing this World War I project, because this, you know, World War I started 100 years ago last year, right? From 14 to 17, and then they signed the armistice in 1918. So taking these old, historically appropriate period pieces, this was actually what's called a sad iron heater, and I'm putting World War I images sandwiched between mica sheets. These were original mica windows where you'd adjust the flame in these little heaters, and an iron would sit on the top. And Rivka and Moshe, friends in here in the audience who know what they're doing photographically, actually helped me set this up the other day. And just wanted to show you that the first time Jaime and I were talking, because he's got an exciting project where he's using images that are not his, and I thought it was amazing. We were both involved with kind of things, and it deals a little bit with the war you mentioned too, did it not? That we're kind of concurrently involved with things like this. And that's kind of fun that that's actually Jewish soldiers in World War I fighting for Germany. There's a certain irony there, isn't there? Yeah. That sad irony. But thank you very much, and I'm happy to take questions about anything.
I'm going to come around with the microphone. It's not going to make your voice louder, but it's necessary for the video, so please speak into it.
Silly question. Did you do the keynote on the computer and then put it on the phone?
Oh, yes. Did you all hear the question? This Keynote, that's the app, the application on the Mac and also the app on the iPhone. Did I do it on the computer? Yes. I mean, there's no joy to be had. You could do it, you know, on the phone or the iPad, but it's a little tedious, right? Remember what we said? You don't get points for doing anything the hard way. So it was done on the Mac with a larger monitor. In fact, I just had to dump everything over. I'd done it for a smaller screen, and then for the HD screen, just had to kind of redo all the slides so it looked better on a big screen. But yeah, you do it on the Mac, and then you save it to iCloud, and then your iPhone, assuming you're on the same iCloud account, bam, up pops the Keynote thing. It's a thing of magic, isn't it? It ain't a perfect world, but it's pretty good. Thanks for asking about that. Any other questions about anything photographic? Yes, ma'am.
What other app recommendations do you have?
Oh, Oh boy, what other app recommendations?
What's your favorite right now?
Well, it sounds like a broken record, but Vivid HDR, I like to break it up. The question about what's my favorite app. It's nice if you break it up into 3 areas: capture or shooting apps, then editing, and by editing we mean everything from cropping to fixing contrast problem, color balance problems, and then we get into stylizing. That's where we can do all the textures, the artifacts, borders, all that kind of stuff. So if you break it into those 3 areas, capture, editing, and stylizing, you got kind of a framework to work with. So in capture, Vivid HDR is just the best there is. Of course, you wouldn't use that for like a soccer match or something. But then when you get into editing, a couple great starting places, of course, Snapseed, right? And Photoshop Express. Photoshop Express doesn't give you any local control, but it gives, like the noise reduction, the sharpening, Adobe knows how to do those things, right? And it's free, but if you want the noise reduction capability, then they hit you with an in-app purchase, like $4.99. I bought it, and it's really good. I threw away a couple other noise reduction apps once I got paid for Photoshop Express's update. Of course, when you get into style, oh, by the way, Photo Wizard. Are you using Photo Wizard? No, never heard of it. Get Photo Wizard. It gives you, in Snapseed, how many of you use Snapseed? Yeah, it's really great. And it gives us those little control points for selective control. But what if you want to just darken a sky, like a gradient? Like in the darkroom, we'd take a burning card and burn it in. Well, if you try to do that in Snapseed, you put these control points, you'll get like scallop densities at the top. There's no way to get that beautiful, graceful kind of gradient effect. Well, Photo Wizard gives us a gradient tool. It gives us a magic wand tool. It gives us color range. So you got these incredible selection methods, or you can paint in your selections to get these very graceful, very real photographs. I still get the chill when I think about it. And you're doing this in the palm of your hand for 99 cents. And it's really like a bit off like a really good part of Photoshop in there. So you might go to that for like 20 to 30% of your images. Photo Wizard, not for everyone. There's a little bit of a learning curve, but it ain't hard. There are apps that give us layers, true layers. May I show you a quick example? Sure. So let's see, I have a whole folder here there's one in the upper right called Layers and Rays. And I'll show you one that's not even available anywhere. I think it's in here. Yeah, PhotoForge 2. And you can't even get this anymore. No, I don't want to buy KitCam or anything. No thanks. So let's open this image, which is of this old hotel up in the Catskills above Palinville. And so this is shot with the iPhone stylized, but let's zoom in on this old hotel. And you see up there in that window? It's kind of spooky, but now there are actual layers in here. This app actually had layers. And that little figure, which was created in another app, is on that separate layer with a mask. Now, you can do it, but should you do it? That was tedious as the dickens to do that, on a little 4 or 5 inch screen. That would be a better job for Photoshop. Like I said, you don't get points for doing it the hard way. Some things, just do it in Photoshop and be done with it. But you can do that kind of stuff. And now you could do it in a contemporary app would be Leonardo, which would give you layers and layer masks and stuff like that. But thank you for asking. That's part of the fun where we are with mobile imaging, is that you'll read or hear about a new app and it'll just open doors to different kinds of imaging. You'll be able to do things that you just couldn't before. And there again, for those of us that were always enchanted with post-processing, where the capture was just the raw materials and we liked walking that image to someplace else, the iPhone just takes that to the nth degree. So thanks for asking. Yes, sir.
Do you have an Instagram account?
I do not.
No, because it seems that you work a lot with digital, but from digital you move into printing, and that's primarily how you present your work. And I just wanted to know, what if you could speak more about why you opt for printing and your printing process, even though a lot of what you do is digital and can be easily communicated to people a lot faster.
Yeah, I've kind of reached my threshold with like Facebook, and it may be because I'm getting old, that I'm just a little resistant to technology. I actually turned down a book offer 2 years ago. Someone said, "Would you like to write a book on Instagram?" I said, "You got the wrong freaking person." I said, "Hey, I don't like something where I got to fight to keep it from putting every image I take out on the web. I don't want that." But there are ways to get around that now, as I understand. And I probably should have an Instagram account, but I don't. But we could be Facebook friends. But no, the print, there's something, with all these electrons floating around, and the printed image may diminish in importance, especially amongst young people. The still image may diminish in importance. We're so into video, and movement is becoming so crucial. There's a whole wonderful website that popped up on just the, what's Cinemagram, where one thing will be moving in the frame, and it's amazing stuff. I mean, it's very exciting. But at some point, it's wonderful to have a thing. And I really like small prints that can be enjoyed in the hand or on the wall. You know, big prints kind of push you away from them. Small prints are they kind of draw you in. They're kind of seductive. So I really like the small prints where there's an element of special preciousness. But thanks for asking about that. But sorry I don't have an Instagram account.
No, it's fine.
Yes, ma'am.
Speaking of printing, what profile would you use to print on vellum?
Actually made one. And you know, I think as photographers, we should be making pictures and prints or web pages. We shouldn't be making profiles. But for this, I was fortunate that a company that sponsored me kind of gave me this box of stuff that I could, you know, print out the chart and then read it with a colorimeter and make a custom profile. I'm happy if you email me. I'm happy to give you the profile, and I'll even give you the source of where I buy the vellum. I mean, there are no secrets to this, but I just print the vellum on an Epson 3880, which is just a stunning printer. You know, it's been out for a couple years now, but it's great. Yeah, just email me at info@danburkholder.com, and I'll just say, send me some vellum info, and I will. Thanks. Sure. Any other questions?
I have an observation, fortune cookie for you. I'm not sure it's a question, but you know, I remember growing up with cameras and gearing up to go shoot. You know, put the camera bag over my shoulder, camera on my neck. It felt like I was putting on my photographer hat. The iPhone, on the other hand, it's always in my pocket. And I was wondering if you can, you know, comment on the shifting experience of photographing with the little iPhone as opposed to the traditional way we used to go out into the world.
Well, yeah, great, perfect question. And Jaime and I were talking a little bit earlier. There again, every development, you look at that 180 some years, every development in photography has been about what? Making photography easier and more accessible. There hasn't been any development to make it harder and less accessible to the masses, has there? So it's just that our hat has gotten smaller. I mean, you look at pictures of Ansel Adams with his view cameras and mules, you know, when he was doing his Yosemite work, and now it's replaced in part by something like this. So it's a wonderful thing, isn't it?
I was thinking of the idea that when I take a camera with me, I'm kind of more motivated to look for things to photograph, whereas the iPhone is just an extension of myself. It's like another organ almost. It's with me all the time. I don't, you know, I'm not consciously taking a camera with me. I don't know if that's too abstract.
That's something you'll have to get over. No, Jerry, let's give credit where credit's due. Jerry Uelsman, you know, one of my mentors and heroes, master of the composite image. When he was teaching graduate students, he made them, they always have to have a camera. But this is pre-digital times even. They always have a camera with them. And he said, he insisted on this for two reasons. He said, it makes you more visually aware, for one thing. When you have a camera with you, you're looking for things to photograph. It's sort of why we also take trips, when we do journeys. You know, we know the photographs are all around us. Ruth Bernhard, another wonderful, you know, previous matriarch of fine art photography in America, you know, she would give her students an assignment to shoot within 30 feet of where they slept. The point being that the images were everywhere. But yet sometimes it takes a trip where we invest time, we invest money to get out, to kick us in the ass, to make us do more images. But the other thing that Jerry Uelsman said, besides making us more visually aware, and the iPhone could do that. I mean, I feel, I'm looking when I just have my iPhone with me. It doesn't take another camera anymore. But he also, there was another great point. He said, it was a license for bizarre behavior. That, you know, if you saw a rock there alongside the road, if you're down there like this, just looking at this rock without a camera, people will think there's something wrong with you. But if you have a camera, now it's even an iPhone, if you have this out there, oh, isn't that sweet, that he or she's going to take a picture of the rock. And that's acceptable. So you can get by with a lot if you have a camera with you. So those were his two reasons for carrying a camera. Thanks for asking. Any other questions? If not, thank you very much for coming tonight. Appreciate it. I wonder away from this mic, if I do, does my voice still carry? Because I sort of move around, but I'll try to stay anchored in this one position. Believe it or not, we're going to sort of talk in a roundabout way about the whole arc of photography. You know, it's been around for what, 188 years now, from the oldest surviving photograph, which is from 1826. So that's really a pretty young medium, isn't it? It's not that much history that we even have. You wonder, you know, if you're gonna get a PhD in the history of something, do it in photography, you know, because you don't have to learn as much. There aren't as many books you have to digest. But in like I said, a roundabout way, we're going to kind of, you know, allude to that, but kind of in a self-serving way with my own imagery and some of the delightful stories I'll tell too. And you know, one of the things I always tell people that, you know, if you don't like change, you pick the wrong medium. You know, since the inception, since that first Niepce image, this curve of change has been constant. You know, it's been going up and up. And what really shook up people when we hit like about 20 years ago, in fact, this is the 25th anniversary of Photoshop. When we hit that, the pace of change, of course, just went vertical. And that threatened a lot of people. It energized a lot of people. And, you know, I kind of think photography is sort of like, oh, my sister just sent a message, and oh, it doesn't show up there. That's nice. So just order bulk case of Viagra. Oh, that's an important message. So we were afraid that the message would pop up here, but they don't.
He's presenting from his iPhone in case you didn't.
Oh yeah, the whole thing is from, this is the presentation right here. So yeah, thanks for my, yeah, I mean, it's so cool. You don't come in with, what are these old-fashioned things called, lippy tops or something? Lap 55 and 6 to a contemporary image, and we're going to talk about the similarities here. So that's one of the early pieces. And believe it or not, I still have that problem running out of space when I sign my name. I don't allow enough space. Once years ago, I won this billboard contest where they turned an image into a 40-foot wide billboard, and they asked me to sign it, and I did the same thing. I signed it and ran out of space for my last name. So nothing really changed. But that's 1955 or 56 with the bird in the tree. And then we go to a contemporary platinum palladium image, which is digital, of the speckled vulture in pine forest. You see some similarities there? Let's go back to 1955. So there, the building in the center. I wish I could tell you that was a camera on that tripod, but I think it was some kind of ray gun or something that I put the gun. And then we'll go to a contemporary image of the Flatiron in spring. So let's do another one here. Notice the bold use of symmetry with the building in the center and the trees on the side, 1956. And then School and Trees, Scotland, which is a Photoshop image. Everything was there except for that little one-room schoolhouse. This is 20 years old, this image. And that little one-room schoolhouse is where Lyndon Johnson went to school in Texas. So I, of course, dropped that into Photoshop back before we even had layers. And then the shape of the, like the road or the shadow, whatever you'd like to regard it, was, of course, done in Photoshop, as was the vignette on the sky. And the last one I'm going to show you here, this was from 1956. The teacher thought this was so advanced, it was beyond postmodern. She called it post-futurist. So that's 1956. And then here is a contemporary tops. We used to be used back in the Paleolithic era. But no, I just think it's thrilling, unless it screws up, then I won't think it's so thrilling, so thrilling, that we can walk in with your phone and do a whole presentation from it. And by the way, this is from Keynote, which is sort of like a PowerPoint done right, you know, without all the bloat and all the other stuff. But let's talk about what you should, if you don't like change, maybe consider pottery instead. Because in pottery, your big change was moving from the foot-driven potter's wheel to the electrically driven potter's wheel. That was your big innovation. And that's all you had to adapt to. In photography, it's all about change. And it's sort of like a ride at the fair. You can be very timid. You can stay outside the carnival and you can watch the rides, you know, the tilt-a-whirl. You can not even get close. Or you can be a little braver and you can go into the carnival, stand next to it and watch the other people having fun. Or you can get on the ride, throw your hands up in the air, scream, and really enjoy it. And photography is the same way. So I think it's the best course is to do that last one. Jump on the ride, scream, be a little bit intimidated, be a little bit scared, turn your wallet upside down, shake all your money out, you know, but enjoy it. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about some stuff here. Photographic memories is what I like to call this little section. I've been showing this for years because I think it's so apropos. And it's about our design aptitudes. And what I've done here is juxtaposed, and you know it's a serious art talk if we use a word like juxtapose. So I've juxtaposed historic images of mine from the first grade, and that was a pre-photographic era, personally speaking. I was working in crayon at the time. So we're gonna go from 19.
Hello and welcome to Digital Photography's I3 lecture series. We are thrilled to have Dan Burkholder as tonight's guest speaker. Dan received his BA and MFA degrees in photography from the Brooks Institute. Originating the digital negative process in 1992, Dan helped open doors for black and white photographers interested in moving into the new electronic technologies. His award-winning book, Making Digital Negatives for Contact Printing, is regarded as the most authoritative work in the field. More recently, he has published The Color of Loss, An Intimate Portrait of New Orleans After Katrina, 2008, and iPhone Artistry, 2011. His works are in the permanent collections of the Houston Museum of Art, the Whitney Museum, San Antonio Museum of Art, and the Phoenix Museum of Art. Dan has taught classes and workshops at the School of Art Institute of Chicago, the International Center of Photography, the University of Texas at San Antonio, and the Museum of Photographic Arts in San Diego. Dan, I admire how you're always on the side of innovation, but never lose sight of the traditions that have brought us to the present moment. And just from talking to you earlier, I know it's going to be a really fun lecture and very, very full of insight. So thank you and welcome to our lecture series.
Thank you, Jaime. Well, thanks, Jaime, for the warm introduction, most of which is even accurate. So, and thank you all for coming. And image. So the point that is obviously what I'm trying to make is this aesthetic ROM chip of ours is burned very early on. You know, whether it's because of the kind of wallpaper we have around our cribs or the kind of curtains we have blowing or the texture of our father's beards, the shape of our mother's breasts, whatever it is, those kind of inputs burn into the sense of design that we have. So if you find yourself drawn to those same things, those same compositions, those same textures, those same lighting patterns, over and over, that's okay, honor that. But just make sure it's coming from in here and not because you saw a Judy Dater or a Michael Kenna or an Ansel Adams show or something the weekend before over at the Met. Make sure it's coming from in your heart. Now this next little section, this deals with the transition from classic to digital. For instance, this image is not digital. And Jaime, we worked on the projector. He did a great job of making some adjustments. You are losing a little bit of detail in the shadows, and some of the colors are a little off, but it's really, he helped me out a lot getting it much closer. So it ain't perfect, but it's really good. So nothing digital about that. That was done in the wet darkroom. And years ago, I wrote my master's thesis on masking. This was before we had Photoshop. I alluded to the coming digital revolution, but this was done on easel with multiple negatives, of course, a la like Jerry Ullsman, putting multiple images together. This image, there's nothing digital at all about this. This is, in fact, this is one of my favorite images. And this was shot on film, Tri-X. How many of you remember Tri-X? Or maybe you're still using Tri-X, a great film, but processed in Paper Developer to pop a grain. Now we're going back to